In 2018, the US created 292 million tons of waste. That's about 5 pounds of waste per person per day. The US produces more than 30% of the planet's total waste. It's that staggering number that I want to keep in mind, where I want to talk to you about how art plays a role in speaking to how to advocate for recycling, reusing, and the repurposing of materials in a creative way so that we can speak to a global issue that faces us all over the world. To be clear, the concept of repurpose and reuse is not new to our modern age or waste management, really. Early settlers would reuse bits of cloth and fabric to create quilts for use during winters. Civil War soldiers would often doodle on spent shell casings, even depicting battle scenes or special events or people in their lives. Even in 1912, Picasso created the concept of collages by pasting together bits of paper to create works of art. This is his work, Still Life with Chair Caning, from 1912. It was considered one of his first collages, consisting of various assemblages of the letter JOU and a strip of oilcloth with chair caning printed on it, along with pieces of rope that acts as the frame for the work. You may remember my video featuring Duchamp and his ready veins. These two are a repurposing of materials to create something completely different. The environmental movement of the 1960s generated a whole new theme for artists, one that revolved around the planet and the environment. Artists began to make works using those waste products in an effort to draw attention to the catastrophic nature of man and the harm that our consumption created. It wouldn't really be till the 1980s before museums and galleries began to exhibit these works. Till then, they were relegated to street level or backdoor shows, almost along the lines of folk art. The term upcycling was coined around 1998 and was about preventing the waste of potentially useful materials by reusing them to create something new. This would ultimately lead to the regenerative design culture, which thought to make things cleaner and sustainable through reuse. What I want to do is look at a few artists around the world who have recycled, reused, or repurposed materials to create some of the most spectacular art while at the same time addressing a concern that may or may not have a connection to the materials used, but will require you to address a bigger picture put forth by the work itself. The concept, therefore, goes beyond the conventional recycling of materials by creating objects that exceed the economic, cultural, and social value of the original product. As the great Albert Einstein once said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Our first artist hails from Ghana. This is El Anatsui. What you're seeing are sculptures, not textiles. Although you would be correct in wanting to make that connection. Ghana has a long tradition with textiles, most notably the kente cloth. These sheets of intricate patterns are made from discarded liquor bottle tops. The pattern again draws from a connection to West African's cultural landscape. You would even say that these sheets are a landscape in and of themselves. He is interested in the reuse of found materials in the developing world. These are not the found objects in the Duchamp sense of the words, but instead a focus on the connections each of these items has had to the human hand. What I mean by that is that El Anatsui is interested in the DNA, so to speak, that we all leave on cast-off items. He says of it, you've touched it, I've touched it, there is now a bond between you and I. This idea is related to religious and spiritual practices in many parts of Africa. For example, if you consult a spiritualist, they may ask you to bring an item that belongs to them, something that they handled or used. That has residue of their spirit. You could say that El Anatsui's sculptures revolve around a transition, the changing of one thing to another. Each of these individual bottle tops are no longer going back to their original purpose, but now serving a new one. They are now elements that inspire thought and wonder. Because they are removed from their original context and created into a whole new one, they bring along their histories and identities of before and join together collectively to speak to a new way of thinking. It's like leaving a trace on everything we touch, human contact left on that which we consume. Why bottle caps? The historical connection between Africa and Europe during the early days of colonization. These caps are local brands of liquors, and stitching them together is like fusing these continents together in a way. Our next artist is MOffatt Takadiwa. Takadiwa is from Zimbabwe, particularly in Harare, which is a hub for recycling and repurposing in Zimbabwe. You may be able to see a connection to works of Anatsui. Takadiwa has worked using a number of various types of found objects. His most captivating to me are his works with e-waste. E-waste is electronic waste left over from discarded computers, everything from the CPU to the keyboards. E-waste is a particular hazard in Africa, as there are parts of Africa who will burn and the plastics and silica in the computer chips to get to the precious materials like gold that are found within them. This is not only harmful to the humans burning these materials, but also to the environment that they let out and they're abandoned once the materials have been removed. His works are an echo of a colonial past. What I mean by this is that it's often a Eurocentric romanticization that Africa is abundant in all these natural resources. Post-colonial Africa saw its former colonizers return to repopulate the lands of their former settlements with trash as a stand-in. What Takadiwa does is reappropriate found objects in garbage from the West to create a certain cultural identity. His works seem topographical in the ways the folds and ridges undulate around one another. It is reminiscent of the land affected by such waste materials. He wants his work to draw attention to waste management and our boundless consumption patterns. Do you think he's succeeded? My next artist is Ma Li, a Chinese artist from San Francisco. Ma Li has a great love for her cultural heritage, but was distressed by the sheer volume of waste created by factory work. Many products from China would be sent back after use to become part of landfills back in China. This was a springboard for her in her work, and she can often be found rummaging through the pier dumps of San Francisco looking for materials for her work. There's a dreamlike quality to her installations. Many of her installations are inspired by stories she heard as a young child, many with historical Chinese connections. This is what inspires her to perform with her works. China is often known for its well-choreographed dances and displays, and Ma Li does the same things with her found objects. She imbues them with a sense of wonder and awe. These works are very interactive and inviting, really. You want to engage with them. You see them not as what they are, but what they are now. Let's look at her work, Meet You at the Birdcage in the Milky Way. This work is based off a Chinese folktale in which a cowherder and a weaver maid were separated by a galaxy of stars. The two lovers are reunited by sympathetic birds who form a bridge across the stars so that the two lovers could unite again. This takes me to a quote by Ma Li. She said, "Working with these materials by hand changes your relationship with them. We produce and consume so much and don't take the time to think about what we are throwing away and where it goes. When these bottles were made by machines, they were all exactly alike. Now they have been remade by human hands, and they all are different individuals that form a community." Engaging in art, being a part of it. This is why art compels us as viewers. Like we just saw, that engagement can be part of the adventure created by these artists with these materials. That adventure could even lead you into the pages of Vogue magazine. Meet Chinese artist Wan Youngfang. Each of his works are made for only him to wear, but the messages they send are for everyone. His gowns are constructed from discarded items. The message is one about the destructive power of human consumption. Many of his works revolve around environmental awareness in particular. Young Fang is a bit of a performer, and frankly, he comes by it naturally. His father was a performer as he is. He would go watch his father on stage, but was drawn visually more to the gowns and dramatic colors of the female performers. With that in mind, he sought to imbue his gowns with a real flair for drama, considering everywhere he goes a catwalk on which to showcase his outfits. He often develops the movements and mannerisms of the animals that may be affected by the imagery within his work. For example, the struggling movements of an animal wrapped in netting, the laborious steps of creatures from being wrapped in plastic. It's his hope that viewers see these connections he's making, how environmental issues affect not just humans, but animals alike. Recycled and repurposed art doesn't have to consistently revolve around the environment as an end product. The act of recycling in any way certainly has its environmental connections, but what I mean is that its end product can speak to something totally different. Meet Lin Evola-Smidt and her peace angels. These angels are constructed from melted guns. Horrified by the violence in Los Angeles in the 90s from gun violence, Lynn worked to get these guns removed from the streets of her hometown. She wanted to advocate for peace and social change, and these creations were her way of returning that to the community. Recycle Nation states, she has worked with communities around the world turning swords into plowshares, using a variety of materials, weapons such as landmines and decommissioned steel from nuclear bombs. Furthermore, Evola Schmidt relies heavily on the culture and society that provides the raw material and home for the angel for its inspiration. Her works can be seen in Mexico, Jerusalem, Sarajevo, Bosnia Herzegovina, and Johannesburg, South Africa, all locations that have had their fair share of violence. There are so many great creations and ideas surrounding the use of recycled and repurposed art that clearly there needs to be a part two to this series because I can't cover them all. But before we go, I want to shine the light, so to speak, on one more artist or artists. That is the in your face duo of Tim Noble and Sue Webster. One visit to their website and you'll know what I mean. This dynamic duo makes assemblages of rubbish and, with the help of a well positioned light source, transforms the shadow cast by that rubbish into something identifiable. They call it a play on perceptual psychology, that is, conscious and unconscious aspects of human perception. What they seek to do is transform waste into something else. This transition from the unrecognizable to the recognizable is part of the way Tim and Sue attempt to get into your head. Their works have often been called non-sculptures or anti-monuments, as the question would be, what is the sculpture anyway? The rubbish pile? Or the shadow cast by the rubbish pile? Their works are a kind of punk rock way to address the antithesis, high culture versus anti-culture, male versus female, craft versus rubbish, sex versus violence, light versus dark. We've seen how artists can take one thing and make it something completely different. The life that these materials find themselves recast in is one of messaging, enlightenment, beauty, and fear. The transformation and transitioning of materials, in an environmental sense, express a need for action when it comes to sustainable living. Each of these artists' creations acts as a platform from which to speak the need for change. The question is whether we choose to listen and heed their warning, or do we continue on the path we've already laid for ourselves, a path sometimes paved with garbage.